I'm Amanda Knox, and you're listening to Hard Knocks. Today, I'm speaking with Zahra Amanpour, who is an entrepreneur, a mother, and an activist for the Iranian resistance. In light of the current war with Iran, I spoke with Zahra about the Iranian resistance movement, about what it means for the West to have a relationship with the current regime, and also just general discussions about how to both resist and to rise above the challenges that we face, the losses that we face, the sacrifices that we have to have in life, what it means to have a mission in life, and how to better understand the relationship between women and Muslim culture and how women within the Muslim world and within the Western world can find common ground. I hope you really enjoy it, because I did. Zahra, thank you so much for coming on Hard Knocks. I'm really thrilled to talk to you. Also because I'm a complete ignoramus when it comes to the thing we're going to be discussing today, but which is such a lived and hard-won experience and an ongoing experience for you. So, from the outside, you're just, you're an entrepreneur, you're a mom, you're a successful woman who's living, in Jersey City, living her life, living her best life. But also, you are a political activist, and you're an Iranian American citizen who has suffered the consequences of the current regime that has been in power since 1979. So I want to start this conversation by asking, as an Iranian American, what do you want other, your fellow Americans to understand about the current situation in Iran?
That's a great question. And thank you for giving me, first of all, the chance to be here today to talk to you about this and to bring our perspective, my perspective, to your audience. I really appreciate it. So what we would like, and when I say we, I'm referring to the Iranian resistance, which is very much alive and strong. And so I consider myself part of that resistance. It's not a homogenous resistance. It's a very broad, wide resistance, includes people from all ethnicities, all genders, everything of Iran. And it's really representative of the full Iran and the Iranian people, more importantly. So what I want, there's really two things I want for the American audience to understand, which I don't think the media is doing enough justice to. The first is that the will of the Iranian people and the will of the Iranian regime are not one and the same at all. And so in order to understand the situation in Iran, you have to separate those two things and understand that, yes, of course, Iranians are nationalistic. No, we do not want to be bombed or for any external interference to happen in Iran. But what the regime's propaganda and narrative is not the same as the Iranian people. So that's the first thing that I think is really important for anyone who wants to know this issue better to understand and to try to dig deeper to get to the Iranian people's voice rather than listen to the regime's voice, which is what is most amplified, unfortunately, in this country because of lobbying and other reasons. The other thing we really want is for the West to step outside of what has been the dynamic for the past 3 decades, really, with the Iranian regime, which is that there's always been 2 options on the table. One is, let's talk to Iran, let's negotiate with the regime, let's give them incentives to do what we ask, and let's sort of try to reason with them. This is not a regime that can be reasoned with whatsoever. This is a brutal, misogynistic regime that every day is hurting its own people in a vicious way, and has been emboldened by those negotiations and what we call appeasement by the West to, 1, suppress its people even further, and 2, to cause havoc in the Middle East, across the entire region. So what Americans and Europeans consider to be good intention of, well, let's have a conversation, because with normal people, you can have a conversation, leads to actually the emboldenment of a vicious and cruel regime in Iran. The other option that's always on the table, or not always, it is either or, I should say, is war. If the regime doesn't do what we tell it to do, we should come in and exert ourselves on the country and make sure it does that. Most recently, as we've seen, they bombed Iran, right? So we, again, don't want that either, because war is never the answer. Violence is never sort of where we would want to go with this. And it will only lead to more violence, and it makes the regime sort of the victim in that part of the world, right? And then further emboldens it that way. So these two dynamics have actually played a key role in keeping the regime powerful and able to do what it does for decades now. Neither one has been effective. Neither one has changed anything. If anything, it's gotten worse over the last 20 years. And the regime has proven time and time again, it has zero intention to stop doing what it's doing. And it's gone as far as now, in the last 20 years, to start developing this nuclear weapon, which has led us to where we are today. What we want the people of America and the people of Europe to understand is that there's a third option on the table. That is the people of Iran, the people whose voice is not being heard in the West enough. In 2022, I don't know how tuned in you were to the uprisings in Iran, but those brave women and men that stood up and took a stand against the regime, that was just one small glimpse into what is waiting to happen in Iran. The people of Iran are tired of this regime. They have organized resistance, which I've been part of my entire life. And if the West would support that notion that the Iranian people can do this on their own, if we don't further embolden the regime in one shape or another, then we have no doubt that the people of Iran will topple that regime and Iran will become a free and democratic country. And that's what we want. So we want people to understand it's not one or the other. We're so polarized in this country for so many reasons, right? And everything seems to be a dichotomy of some sorts, right? But that's not the reality. There's other options, there's other solutions. And for Iran, there's another solution too.
That's fascinating. What is the current state of life for people in Iran under the current regime, which is, just to state it for those who don't know, is a theocratic system. Ultimate authority rests with the supreme leader. There's no separation between religion and state. There's no gender equality. Can you tell me, what is the life for a human being who's living in Iran right now, and I'm curious to know how people are experiencing it, both just what the physical reality is, but also the emotional reality.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just start. All the things you just said, completely accurate, right? For the last 45 years, the people of Iran have lived under a theocracy, a brutal theocracy that has suppressed the people through sheer violence and an authoritarian sort of approach to everything. To your point, Khamenei, currently used to be Khomeini, is the supreme leader. And this false notion of elections in Iran is something that's something they also sell to the West. Well, we have elections. We have a democracy. No one gets to run in that election if they're not approved, fully endorsed, and go along with the regime's way of doing things. In terms of a person living in Iran, for women in particular, it has been horrible for 45 years. Women in Iran, despite, this is another thing you said, what would I want people to understand? Every country in the Middle East is very different. Our media sometimes bunches it all together, gives these images that kind of make it look all the same. But every country in the Middle East is very different, has its own unique sort of attributes. The Iranian population is actually extremely educated, well connected. Women are more educated by just pure sheer numbers than men in terms of higher level university degrees, STEM degrees, all of those things. So that's kind of contradictory to what you would think is happening in the country. But that's one thing that the regime knew better than to mess with, right? Where the regime has really been oppressive with women is obviously on their personal choices around their body, clothing, reproductive care, family life, all of those things, and has ensured that women essentially have been the second-class citizens, if not worse than that, for the last 45 years. And that is an essential part of their ideology. They are fundamentalists, fascists, fundamentalists. And in order for fundamentalism to thrive, you have to have us against them. Women are the against within the country of Iran.
Wow.
Externally, the West is the evil, right? But internally, women have been the evil that we must control, that we must tame, that we must do that. So for women, it's been extremely oppressive. And has really held back the potential of women, obviously, in Iran. Despite that, they have risen. Despite that, you saw the courage a few years ago. Despite that, they're getting degrees. Despite that, they're getting Nobel Peace Prizes across the world. All of these things are still happening. But to do that, they have to overcome so much. And most women in Iran have nothing close to those opportunities. For the general population, the regime has been robbing the people of Iran of its natural resources and sort of infrastructure since its inception. And a lot of times there's a hesitation around sanctions in the West because the understanding is that that would hurt the people of Iran. I wish those things were going to the people of Iran. They're not. The regime has been, if you look at how wealthy the actual leadership of the regime are, the Revolutionary Guard, who are the sort of the enforcement arm of the regime, are, you see that none of those resources are going to the people of Iran. The people of Iran's prices are just skyrocketing right now. The average Iranian, we also always see images of Tehran. It is a major city in Iran, a huge population, but there is a whole rest of the country that is suffering, hungry, illness, inadequate health care, all of those things that you would, sort of are more in what the West would think would be happening. So the people of Iran have been suffering for 45 years, and they have been forced to live under a regime that enforces a way of interpreting our faith. And not all Iranians are Muslim either. That is not accurate and is holding our country back and keeping, I think, the whole region back from its full potential.
What is the role of women in the resistance?
Women lead the resistance. They have since the very early days. In order to fight your enemy, you have to understand your enemy, right? And the women of Iran understand the regime because they have been most oppressed by the regime. And they have, for all those things I mentioned earlier, are actually very empowered to do so, right? Despite everything that has happened. So the leader of the Iranian resistance is Maryam Rajavi. She is a woman. She is an amazing woman. It really speaks to, I believe, all women of the world, and which is what for me as an Iranian American that lives in sort of two realities, everything that I've learned from her and sort of, she's been my example in my whole life, applies here as much as it does to the Iranian society, which is understanding our sisterhood, understanding how solidarity with one another across the globe, how that's so important for our overall freedom and resistance across the world. And she really speaks from that platform. Under her leadership, women have risen to the top of the resistance, both externally from a political perspective. The majority of the resistance leadership is women. Within Iran, there's a lot of resistance units that exist. Women play an instrumental, central role in that also. So this is our fight, and the resistance shows that there are many men in this fight with us, and they are have sacrificed as much. I don't want to take away from that at all. But even they know this is a fight for women. This is to fight the Iranian regime. We have to acknowledge the role of women and the leadership of women.
What can we learn from her leadership, especially in such a male-dominated political landscape?
I think some of the things that she's really shown me as someone who looks up to her and tries to honestly relate what she's taught me to my life every day is the voice of a woman, right? And the perspective of a woman is different and as valuable as a man's. Across the globe, the perspective and voice of women has sort of been marginalized by all different types of societies. That perspective and that voice, she believes, should not be changed, should not be altered to become more man-like or to become more acceptable to the mainstream way of doing things, but should be embraced and used as a mechanism for change and freedom for women and for men everywhere around the world. Just in my daily life, my role in my family, my freedom, the choices I make about my body, as a Muslim woman, right? You see, I don't wear hijab. She wears hijab, right? As a Muslim woman, that is a choice. In the Muslim world, these types of things have to be addressed for women in the Muslim world to have true freedom. And she does that in a very eloquent way and helps me understand that my own choices within the context of my faith, within the context of my realities, my children, my family, all of that, the fact that I have that choice and I make that choice every day is what's most important, and sort of what we're all fighting for together. And that is what unifies us as women across the world. And I think any American woman can relate to that right now.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you because, recently I was speaking with another person that I interviewed, Dan Savage, who I don't know if you are familiar with him. He's a sex advice expert, but he was, I happened to catch him in a moment where he was just very angry at the current political moment because he felt like even here in the West, you are seeing an increase in this misogynistic ideology that wishes to marginalize and silence women's voices and to remove them from places of power and leadership. And I wonder, have you noticed that, or do you here in the West, or do you think that that's a little bit is that? Do you have any fear of that here in the West, or are you more like, no, we have it under control. Let's focus on helping the women who are actually in regimes that are actively oppressing them?
I absolutely, as an American woman, feel that. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I am concerned for her future, her rights, what her value will be 10, 20 years from now. But I think, this is a progression, right? And I think we have to take it for where it is in that progression. I think in the United States, thankfully, we are still very privileged and have a lot of rights, right, as women. And we have mechanisms to fight back and really take control back in our hands. We have to do it. If we don't do it, it's a slippery slope. We will be there before we know it. So I think that's where we are in the West. And I take that very seriously as someone who lives in America, as someone who has a daughter, as someone who cares about this, obviously, as a global issue. So, yes, it exists. In Iran, it's a different beast, right? It has evolved and twisted and turned for 45 years into what it is now. And it was very intentionally done under the guise of a theocracy. So I think we have to be cautious. I think we have to be aware. And I think more importantly, we have to understand that these are global issues. I am on the board of an organization called Women's Freedom Forum, which is focused on women's human rights globally. And that's what we do, is we sort of raise the voices of women everywhere and find those common grounds, common themes, ways to sort of fight for one another's cause, whatever the circumstances may be. So I think in that way, we have to find solidarity as Americans with women around the world, with especially under regimes like the Iranian regime. But we have to recognize where we all are, and not, because I've seen women in the West get like overwhelmed with this issue and sort of melt and not quite know how to. We still have choices. We still have ways to stop this and change this and address this. But the themes, the threads are there between our countries and what is happening across the world. And anytime you have fascism rising, these are the types of things that happen.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, one of the main reasons why study abroad is, I think, so important is because I think you're right that, like, when you are just familiar with the way the place where you grew up is, you have a limited understanding of what kinds of freedoms or limitations that your culture and your government has imposed upon you. I think you take for granted certain freedoms, or you take for granted certain restrictions, and you don't understand potentially the more broader human story of the uplifting of women and the empowering of women. Do you think that's why it's so important for women especially, but also just young people in general, to be aware of Iran's history and to care about Iran's future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to understand that this type of stuff can happen anywhere. And what's happening there has consequences here, right? As long as there's this bipolarization of our societies, this, like, we have to exist in this sort of dichotomy of sorts, that what happens there becomes the enemy, becomes the pointing the finger at, look how much better we are, look what we're doing differently, right? We're not that. And that emboldens any type of oppression and sort of ideology like that. So I think, yes, we absolutely need to understand how this happens. We need to understand what our role has to be in it. As I said, in Iran, women from the very beginning have played an active role, which is why when the regime came to power, it was the first thing it took out, right? It was like, okay, we're going to take women out of this equation, and that's going to make this much easier for us. So we have to understand how that can happen. But I also think one of the things that I learned from Mariam Rajavi that I think applies in any country, and particularly what we're going through here right now, is her acceptance of womanhood and what does it mean to be an empowered woman. We have a movement right now of, it's in your world, the podcasting world, of they consider themselves feminine, not feminists, right? They're sort of showcasing, like, this is the role of women. It should be more at home. It should be more about family. It should be, right. There's a lot of they're getting a lot of attention and a lot of following in the United States right now under the current circumstances. And I've seen a lot, obviously, that's not what I subscribe to in my life, right? But I've seen a lot of my friends, my coworkers, pounce on that and say, oh, that's disgusting. Why would they do that? Listen, if we truly believe women have choices, the last thing we should be doing is focusing on that. We should be moving in the direction of forward together. If that's their forward, so be it. They have a right to have that forward, and they have a right to talk about it. But turning them into the enemy distracts from what's really happening in the big picture, right? And I think when you look at a movement like what we've been through as a resistance for the last 60 years under two regimes, in the last 45 years under this regime, that's something that we've had to come to face with and accept, is that that's still my sister. And we still have to move in a direction together. And that is the freedom to make those choices for ourselves.
Right. Same as the freedom to wear the hijab or not wear the hijab. Like, that's where it ultimately comes down to. Do you get to actually have the freedom of choice, or is it a choice that is imposed upon you? I think that's a really interesting point, because I do see that very often, especially when we talk about like the politicization or the turning into an ideology about like what womanhood is and what it means and its place in society, I often find that very often what ends up happening is there are women's voices are sort of pitted against each other instead of, juxtaposed next to each other. And I think that like both, I could see both arguments being, I understand where like the feminists who have been working so hard for something like economic empowerment, for instance, or like economic independence, because it is absolutely crucial for someone to actually be free to make their own decisions, to also be economically independent. You cannot make decisions for yourself if you are depending upon a man to provide for you. So like I understand why certain feminists, especially like just get rankled when they then see women who have the power to choose whether or not to be economically dependent upon their man, like just sort of flaunting that. But at the same time, I also think that our society doesn't make it easy for women to be economically independent because it's come so far with the cost of a lot of our expressions of femininity, our ability to be mothers, our ability to be, family oriented. Like a lot of us women, you and me know as, economically independent women who own our own businesses, it is hard. It is hard to be everything. And I'm a little bit going crazy and I'm a little bit feeling like I'm never enough of everything I need to be. And that's because we don't have a society that supports people being able to be in both roles. And so I think that you're right. Like there's validity to both of these expressions of femininity, which is the independent, economically empowered one, and then the nurturing, caretaking at home version of femininity. Both of those things should be okay to be. And I also find myself a little bit frustrated when so much energy is spent in opposition to each other and as opposed to in recognition of what we have in common, that finding of common ground and that mutual supporting of the ultimate dream, which is to be everything.
Absolutely. And to not feel judged or belittled as a result of it, right? And I think that's really something that the resistance has taught me. We come in all shapes and forms, and we have a right to do that. And we have every right to be all those things. And if we can start to see that on a global level in some way, like when the 2022 uprisings happened, the West turned it into a fight against hijab, right? And there were a lot of women on the street taking off their hijab, cutting their hair. And it was amazing, beautiful, right? But what they were saying was, I want freedom to make this choice, right? It's not about hijab or no hijab. It's about the freedom to make this choice. And this is how I'm, in the context of what I'm experiencing in Iran right now, how I'm going to stand up against that, of people taking away my choice. So that sort of, that's what we have to start to get is we have the right to be all of those things. And that sisterhood that comes from that, I think is really, really important to us being able to sort of finally overcome some of these oppressions that we have globally. Because what you just described as, and I experience every day as an American woman, is true everywhere. No matter what we do, we're not good enough. We can't get it all done. We should feel bad. We should feel guilty. These are universal things that women are experiencing. And if we can find some commonality there, I think we can also have more empathy for each other and more understanding of what's happening in my country, Iran, right? And how we can support one another and be part of sort of moving the needle in the right direction.
Here's a question, and this is coming from like a genuine like question for me space, because I've interviewed in the past Yasmin Mohammed, who is a very huge activist against hijab, and I'm just wondering, her perspective is that the hijab is fundamentally a a a thing that is designed for the oppression for women, for the shrouding, and it is a expression of oppression. And so, and I'm not actually asking you to specifically discuss the hijab at this moment, but I'm more asking a question of how do we as women recognize what is an expression of femininity versus what is an expression of, internalized oppression. Like, how do we distinguish between how we want to express ourselves as women and as feminine, and do so in a way that is not just clinging to old oppressive models like that. You know what I'm trying to say? Because
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I'm asking myself, even just, there are clear examples, I think, that everyone can agree on of like oppressive practices that have been imposed upon women, like female circumcision, for
Mhm,
example,
mhm.
that I don't, I from the perspective of, like, as a very liberal person who never wants to judge anyone's choices, like, of course I want everyone to be able to choose whether or not they wear a scarf on their head or not. Like, what do I care?
Yeah.
But there are certain lines, right? Like, I don't think anyone in their, in their right mind would choose to be, for a woman would be choose to be circumcised. So like, when you think about these issues, and because you're embedded, in this debate, like, how do you think about what is a true expression of yourself, and where do you draw the line about what is like fundamentally an oppressive expression?
I think that, and thank you for that question, because it's an important question that I think we all have to kind of wrestle with as women at some point.
I mean, everything from like bras and makeup to like all of the things, like all of these things, are they expressions? Are, like, I'm
Exactly, that's
asking
exactly the
myself.
point. You look at like, also the removal of women's clothing has been used as a tool of oppression, right, in humanity's history, right?
Right.
So you could look at it either way, right? For a Muslim woman like myself, the way that I interpret these things is, one, is it a choice, obviously, and two, does it make me a more empowered, authentic version of myself? And if it does that, then that's freedom. And so it's not the object itself or the lack of the object itself. It's what it does to the woman that's using it or being oppressed by it, right?
Right.
So for women like Mariam Rajavi and many of the women who are in the resistance who wear hijab, hijab is a tool of empowerment. It allows them to be present in a space without their sexuality being the main thing on display. It is also an identity that we take pride in, right? It's not a tool of oppression whatsoever. We believe that it brings us to the table. It allows us to fully engage. Now, what is required in terms of hijab depends on context, depends on society, right? Mayam Rajavi is representing the Muslim women of the world. It's important for her to have that identity. It's important for her to have that freedom and showcase that freedom, that I get to do this because I'm a woman. I have a right to do this, and I have the freedom to do this. In my society, I make that choice for myself in my context, right? I've always been more modest than even my friends, and all of that. Just because for me, I like for people, like for me, I honestly would rather engage here, right? So, but that modesty is relative, right? Do I wear shorts? Yes. Do I wear a swimsuit? Yes. I live in America. It's a different context. It's a different identity that I have. I know women in America who wear hijab, and in the communities that they exist in, hijab plays a different role. So it really, you have to take everything. And so does removal of clothing. So does a bathing suit. Why do we wear uncomfortable bikinis, right? Like, what is that about? Is that oppression? Like,
Right.
what are we doing that for? Why do we feel like we have to put makeup on our face every morning in order to function in this society and for the world to see us for who we want to be? So anything when it comes to a woman's body and clothing and choices that she makes can be used against them, can be interpreted in a way depending on the context that it is. So when there are a lot of very strong, outspoken women against hijab in this world, and I get it because it has been used as a tool for oppression in the Muslim world. It has been forced on women. But if we could take that power away from the oppressors by saying it's not yours to make the choice, right? That's going much further than just reacting to what's happening currently, from my perspective.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. And I think that nuance is really important because ultimately you're right. Like everything is relative. Like the fact that we, like we also have rules that police how women are allowed to, present themselves in our society. So we shouldn't, we shouldn't pretend that like it is all relative. It is all a context. It is all an act of like human storytelling. And it's also, in response to, actual ways that human beings interact with each other in the same way that monkeys will signal to each other through appearance in all the same ways. So I think that it is a deeply complicated issue. And I like the way that you're approaching it, which is how does the individual woman feel about it?
Mm-hmm.
Going back to, getting back to democracy in true democracy in Iran, I wonder what you can tell me are some of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to Iranian opposition groups. What do people not understand about the Iranian resistance?
Yeah.
And I understand there's also some controversy around the Iranian resistance. Could you explain what that is and what people don't understand about it?
Absolutely. So you have to understand that there is an enormous propaganda machine working against this resistance. And that is what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, that has been fueled by appeasement and war for 45 years. So that propaganda, which exists within Iran, with the Iranian people themselves also, and externally in the West through hardcore lobbying that has happened on behalf of the regime, has shaped this narrative around the resistance and has made it where a lot of very inaccurate things. One of them we were just talking about, where the woman, Maryam Rajavi, who leads our resistance, is an oppressed woman who wears hijab, and the resistance wants to exert Islam on the society. It could not be further from the truth. We have no desire. We want to create a secular, democratic government in Iran. We would like to put Maryam Rajavi forward as one of our candidate to run, right? But we believe there has to be an election, a free election, a true election. And if if you go to our website, and I'll share that later, you'll see the 10-point plan that's laid out on how women's rights, human rights, ethnic group rights, gender rights, all these rights are at the front and center in the 10-point plan. That has to happen. So that is a huge misconception, is that we want to exert Islam, force Islam onto Iran, and that is not the case whatsoever. The other sort of misconception that the West sometimes buys into is that the people of Iran want to go back to what they had before, which was the Shah, and which is a monarchy. Listen, I hope as a world we start to get to a point where we understand that monarchy is a thing of the past, and nobody wants to live under a monarchy anymore. No, neither do the people of Iran. And there were reasons why we had a revolution in 1979. And that is because there was enormous corruption. There was a selling out of our country to the world, to anyone who would buy it, essentially. And there was disparity unbelievable disparity that was not showcased in the West, but that was present, that led to the revolution. You don't have a revolution like what happened in Iran in 1979, unless there were some really bad things happening, right? So the Iranian people have no desire to go back to that. That is not freedom. The Iranian people want freedom. They want what every human being wants, right? And they deserve that. And they have, unfortunately, went from one dictatorship. There was a lot of dynamics, which we'll probably have to have another conversation about, that led to a power vacuum. And then the current regime was able to come to power when, in fact, the resistance groups, there was many of them that existed at that time that had democracy in mind, that had all the things that would have taken us to freedom at that time. But the dynamics played out and we didn't get it. So now we've been stuck with this horrible regime, this brutal regime for 45 years. So we also, the minute the 2022 uprisings happened, all these people are like, oh, maybe the Shah will go back. No, that's not what they're standing in the street, cutting their hair, taking these risks for. They're not doing these incredible things to live under another dictatorship. That's not what this is about. So I think those are some of the biggest misconceptions. I also don't think enough people know, and so it's not necessarily a misconception, it's a lack of information in the West, that there is a very organized resistance group in Iran, that these two options that we talked about earlier are not the only things on the table, because there happens to be something that can step in and move the country towards democracy. And so I think the more attention we can give to that, the more we can empower the people of Iran to do it for themselves.
Yeah, great. How much, awareness and popular support does the resistance have in Iran?
A lot. But again, it's fighting an uphill battle with propaganda, right? It has, since day one, the sort of nickname that the regime has given the resistance members is the munafiqin, which means the hypocrites, right? They say they're Muslim, but look what they do. Right? So they have been running this propaganda machine. The resistance has lost 120,000 people to executions and brutal murders in Iran, including my father. So we have paid an enormous price to try to keep the resistance alive. We have tried to keep what I spoke about earlier, which is that we don't want to impose anything other than freedom on our country, to keep that narrative alive. And this amount of sacrifice from people that I love and adore around me, my family, extended family, the whole thing, that have had to give to just keep that alive, that notion alive, has been enormous. So they have support. And in 2022, that was showcased by the fact that immediately after people started to rise, and this is what the movement's really waiting for, is as soon as the movement started to rise, they started to embolden the movement, right? And sort of say, go for it, they were much more tactical about, this is how we can do it without less people getting hurt. They tried to help, save people from going to prison. They've been part of these in Iran right now, because since 2022, there's always been an enormous amount of executions, but it really, after 2022, especially women have been paying a huge price in Iranian prisons. They have organized every Tuesday, people come out in the streets and say, stop the execution. So there's all this stuff that's being organized and sort of driven by a movement that is underground within Iran, that has enormous support and is grassroots. And the resistance is fueling that to the extent that it can, under the conditions that it has to do.
Yeah, it sounds really hopeful, but at the same time, we're talking about people being imprisoned, people being executed for being a part of this resistance. What gives you and others hope that freedom is actually within reach?
When has freedom come easy, right? Look at this country. Look what Black people in America had to go through for freedom, right? Look at any group in this world that has fought for its freedom, what they have had to sacrifice and what they have had to endure. it isn't, as Mariam Rajavi says, it is not going to be handed to us with a silver spoon. We have got to fight for it, and we have got to be willing to do what it takes to get there. So I know it's a hard notion sometimes for people to grasp in the West, because again, there's mechanisms here for people to still fight back and to sort of exert their opinions and have their voice, even within different administrations and circumstances. When that is taken away, the choice is clear. You have to have the courage to stand up and take that risk. And the risk in Iran is your life. The women and a lot of these people who've been executed are 16 years old, 18 years. These are young babies. You have kids now. Like the minute you have kids, you start to realize, oh my God, these are babies, right? When you think about you said your daughter's 4, right? 12 years from now, she gets mad because somebody tells her what to do, and she, fights back. Can you imagine? But that, because of that youth, that courage is there, right? That invincibility is there. And so that is what causes revolutions. That is what causes change in the world. And so we want to assume that there's a more less risky way to get there in Iran. Like, let's reform the current regime. Let's negotiate with them and say, if they sort of change some of their policies, we'll help them from a monetary perspective. This regime doesn't want that. It thrives with violence and chaos. So the only way to fight back is to be willing to stand up and to sacrifice literally your life in Iran by doing so. Externally, from, relatively speaking, it's not a sacrifice, but it is a constant responsibility. I don't want to call it a weight, because it's really not a weight. Responsibility that those of us who have been impacted by what is happening in Iran, who have family that has been killed, many of the resistance supporters across the globe are part of those circles that had those 120,000 people killed, right? Not one of them can you talk to that doesn't say, my uncle, my cousin, my friend, my so-and-so was just taken off the street and executed. So for us, it's personal. And it's something we're not going to let go of. We're not going to stop. And there's no amount of comfort or privilege or anything else that we gain by being in the Western world that can somehow take that away from us. That's what has held this resistance together for as long as it has. We support the resistance. We fuel the resistance. Financially, politically, we show up for them, right? We show up for each other. So yeah, it's not going to be easy, and it's never been easy. But the cost of what it means to not do this is far greater. So that in that way, it's not much of a choice, right? I mean, you believe that there's a path towards, there's hope, or you don't. And we subscribe to hope. So,
I'm wondering how you feel about how faith is politicized and weaponized for the sake of upholding or maintaining political status quo. I think that's like a really important question for Americans to even think about, because we don't belong to a theocracy, but we certainly belong to a culture that is deeply informed by religion, and specifically by Christian religion. That is the dominant religion in the U.S. And so to say that, yes, theoretically, or, there is a separation between church and state here in the U.S., in a practical way, like you see how certain, religious groups tend to almost uniformly follow certain political sides rather than others. And I'm wondering if you can maybe tell me how the Iranian citizens are grappling with how their own faith, how Islam and being a Muslim is being weaponized or politicized, and what lessons we Americans can take from how the resistance is responding to that politicization of Islam.
Yeah. The Iranian people, the majority of Iranian people are Muslim, but there is an enormous amount of diversity in terms of the type of Islam that they practice, the conservativeness of it. And then there are also lots of other ethnic groups in Iran that have coexisted with the Iranian people for a long time. So that is part of our history. That is part of our understanding as Iranians, is that we are not all Muslim. We are not all any one faith. And we have been able to, sometimes it's been ugly, but negotiate that as part of our history. And we take a lot of pride in that we have done that as Iranian people. The faith it's sort of like what the hijab we were talking about, right? What they have done, what the Iranian regime has done with the faith has rightfully made a lot of Iranians, especially those external that fled Iran after the revolution, not feel resentful towards the faith as the instrument that's being used against their people and the laws that are being exerted on the people. But that is the tool of the regime. It is not the tool itself. It's like technology, right? Right now, my work a lot is in AI, so I go there. You can say it's evil, right? But it's also doing amazing things in science, and it's doing amazing, right? Like some of the things that are happening are mind-blowing in terms of like how fast we're going to be curing diseases here pretty soon, and how, like, I work with small businesses and how quickly businesses are able to grow now and compete in like some of the most poorest neighborhoods in the United States, right? Any tool, if an evil force takes hold of it and exploits it, can be used for evil. And that is what has always been done with religion. It's just the old technology or whatever you want to call it, So I think the people of Iran have mixed feelings. They are still a majority Muslim, very strong faith. They understand the difference between their faith and what is being used against them. But of course, there are lots of people who also say, get rid of this religion, which is why when we hopefully get to the point where we have a secular country, a secular government, we are able to sort of choose that at that point and make those choices on our own and decide what is best for our families, for ourselves, for our communities, right? And all of that. So I think they're grappling with it. I think they have since day one. Part of the reason we had a revolution with the Shah was because the Shah was ripping Islam out of Iran. Right? The reaction to that was pull Islam in, right? So these are reactionary things. That's why we're in this mess. There was the sell ourselves out to everybody, forget the religion, ignore the majority of the people's will, and then, we're going to rise. Let's embrace our faith. And unfortunately, that backfired on the people of Iran. So, I think we're sophisticated enough as people, and we have enough information now as a humanity to be able to decipher these things, to understand these things. I think we will, as a country, have to come to some understanding about this and a sort of renewed understanding around our faith and what role it does play and doesn't play. But first, we got to get to a point where we can make those choices and then deal with it. The conditions that Iranians are living under doesn't allow for sort of a real conversation around these kinds of things. There's a lot of anger, resentment. There's a lot of like trying to hold on to what's dear. There's all these sides to it. And all of them, they have every right to be feeling those ways. But it goes back to like, that's your choice. That's the point. You get to choose it. But it is, yes, it's being used as an instrument. And we're seeing the rise of religious fascism across the world right now. So when we sort of try to connect the dots between our existence here and other places and in Iran, that's the kind of stuff we have to sort of come to terms with, is that it's just an instrument. right? What is the intention and the people behind it, and what are they trying to accomplish?
Mm-hmm. So I think the one big question I want to ask, just in terms of what we here in the West can do in response to this complicated issue. You talked about how, there's war, there's sanctions, there's appeasements, and then there's this middle path. What is this middle path, and what role does the West have in this path, if anything?
Yeah. I think one is, again, the differentiation between the Iranian regime and the Iranian people. The will of the people is not the same as the Iranian regime. When the bombing started, I was, of course, terrified, devastated, and said, "Oh my gosh, now is this what's going to happen now?" Right? At the same time, though, when I checked in with people in Iran, the response was, "This is horrible. How did this day come? But maybe this will topple the regime, right? Maybe this will
Interesting.
weaken them enough." Now, they would much rather that not happen from any external force bombing Iran for obvious reasons. And for that to happen by the sort of world's acknowledgement of the Iranian people's right and ability to do this for themselves. And the way that we can do that is, one, to start to sort of speak about what is best for the Iranian people as different than what is best on dealing with the Iranian regime. And two, is by honestly just paying attention, like what you're doing today, giving a voice to other perspectives in this country. A lot of shows that I admire for lots of reasons in this country that are very progressive and in most ways reflect my values as an American. When it comes to the issue of Iran, it's, again, appeasement or war. There's never a discussion of what are the real things happening within the country that we should try to support by giving voice to it, by visibility to it, and those types of tools that we have at our disposal in the West, which are very powerful tools. When 2022 uprisings happened, I got suddenly called to all these places to talk, right? And I said, just don't stop watching. Don't stop talking about it. Just the average American, just start to just pay attention, because it matters to you too, that this goes in the right direction. Sure enough.
But how does that help a person who's living in Iran, who's facing, imprisonment and execution? Like, it feels like I hear you, and I know that visibility is important, but like, what's the difference between paying attention and just being a voyeur?
So, for example, what happened with Mahsa Amini in 2022? The Iranian people reacted to that video of her being pulled off the street, which happens, by the way, every day in Iran, right? To women, to everybody, but to women in particular, about clothing and things like that, right? And because of social media and the things that we have at our disposal now, that story blew up across the world, right? The images were shown across the world of what happened to this woman, and it told the story of this woman. And the world started to pay attention. And that made the Iranian people feel like seen, and there was at least some net of safety. The minute that the Iranian regime was able to close off the country again, control the message again, the brutal tactics came into play in terms of just ripping young children out of their homes, the executions that have been happening, and people have been paying the price ever since. And the West, it was more difficult to get the information, but it's still available. But we have to tap into those channels, and we have to pay attention to those channels. The minute that the West stopped watching, the regime closed in on its people. So we are a global world now. We have this ability to do this. and it has emboldened lots of people in the world to sort of tell their story, fight for some sort of freedom, and make change happen. It has the potential to, again, only support. We're not saying be the catalyst. We're not saying make it happen. We're saying support what is happening, by understanding these nuances, by paying attention to the right stories, by not allowing, like when we interview somebody on a progressive show, we have the responsibility to understand, who is this person? Why are they talking? Why is this their message? Right? And I don't know that we do that fully when it comes to the Middle East, because it's just been turned into, like, bunched together, and sort of like who we think we know who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, right? But it's not that simple. And so all of us in our own platforms that we have available to us have that responsibility to kind of make sure we understand the intention behind what is being said. The appeasement, for example, approach is under the guise of peace, right? If you do this, then there'll be peace. Who doesn't want peace, right? Of course, we all want peace. But the reality is that is filling the coffers of the regime and allowing it to support all these groups within the Middle East that are causing havoc around the Middle East. So that's what's really happening. That's the intention, right? And it's not that hard to get there. We just have to understand that the loudest voice is not always the best voice or the right voice, right? That we should be listening to.
Sure. I guess my one question, so like there's the question of what can any individual person do in response, but also there's the question of what should the United States government's relationship with the regime be? Because there's also that. And, you know, on the one hand, we just had bombing in Iran. Mm-hmm. And some people are saying, oh, maybe that's, you know, maybe that's good, maybe that's not good. Like, I think I would love to know your very nuanced perspective of what our government's relationship should be with the Iranian government and with the Iranian resistance. Is there even a relationship between our government and, you know, the resistance leaders?
Thanks to a lot of hard work on the part of the people that I love, there is very much a relationship. It is neither blue nor red. It has intentionally remained impartial because it doesn't want to play into doesn't want American politics to become Iranian politics, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So when you look at it, you have to. That's just one thing I want to make sure people understand. We are fighting for the freedom of the Iranian people. America is an entity in that perspective, right?
And you know, our politics aren't a great thing to export anyway.
So I don't want to go there.
No, we shouldn't.
You know, so we very intentionally have stayed out of America and said, whoever's willing to hear us, thank you, right? And we have gotten bipartisan support on many resolutions over the years. Even more recently, a majority on the 10-point plan that Maryam Rajavi has been putting forward for years now. They signed off on a resolution and embracing that 10-point plan. So there's things like that we can do through legislators and sort of just general policymakers showing their support for the resistance and saying that we believe that this is they have the right to fight for freedom on their own, and that we as Americans should support this grassroots movement and sort of anything that we can do to help them attain what they're trying to go after. We should do that by speaking about it, by understanding the things that you and I are talking about today, etc. So there's that. From a global policy, a more sort of external policy, America has sanctions that it also uses as a tool, right? It does. Tariffs are another version of it, right? Sanctions are another version of it, okay? And in the past, it has been blanketed like, if we're going to war, we sanction everything, right? That hurts the Iranian people if you do it that way. If you were just to do blanket sanctions, not think about what you're actually sanctioning, that would hurt the Iranian people. The other side has been no sanctions. Let's help the regime come to the table. If we sanction them, they won't come to the table. They won't negotiate. And that obviously hurts the Iranian people for all the reasons we've already discussed. There's the part of the third option is targeted sanctions. The Iranian regime has fueled itself through business dealings across the globe and has made itself very wealthy off of that, from the resources that exist within Iran and just the business dealings that can happen in the context of everything that's happening globally right now, right? And they have an educated populace. There's all these factors Iranian has that it can use. If we target only the things that hurt the regime itself, those business dealings, those things that build weapons, things that build that give them fuel, the money that gives them the money to do the things that they're doing in the region, right? And we know what those things are. As the American government, I assure you, knows exactly what those things are. If we only go after those things and it's sort of like strangle them in some way, right? From a monetary perspective, that will further weaken them and further empower the Iranian people to be able to topple them. As long as they're being fueled with business and trade, etc., and those things that go directly to them and not the Iranian people, they can continue doing what they want. It's money, right? We know that's the role that it plays. It's not faith, it's not all these things. It's money.
Do you think if, say and again, this is getting into the weeds of things, but say we impose targeted sanctions, I also understand that, again, economic empowerment plays a really important role for, the freeing of the Iranian people. But wouldn't the government just steal the wealth of the people in order to maintain itself, even if we used targeted sanctions against the regime itself?
Yes, it can, right? But there are certain things that they can't do that. There are certain things that are sort of commodities and et cetera that can be sold, resold, et cetera, put into these business dealings, hidden from the rest of the world, sort of happen, that are much more straightforward than things like the import of food, right? What are they, you can't block that, right? Import of certain resources that really they can't reuse or repurpose or whatever. That ultimately falls in the hands of the people. So you don't want to do things, again, that harm the people. But what you're saying is true too. I don't want to take away from it, because will there be a cost to it? Yes. Will the regime retaliate? Yes. Right. But we already have shown our willingness to stand against that. I only pray that it won't be horrible, but will there be a cost to our freedom? Absolutely. And I strongly believe that the Iranian people are ready and are done enough, right? You have to get to that point as a society where I'm done. That the regime is weakened enough because of its internal strife, because of what's happening around it right now, that combination, all it takes is for that right combination to happen, right? That tipping point to happen, and it can fall. So we're trying to push that towards that tipping point with minimal harm, minimal risk to the Iranian people. And that's the best that a resistance can hope for.
And you think that it's very close?
I do.
Interesting.
I mean,
so
I have to believe that. Is it possible that something else will come into play and could change everything? Yeah. We also have reacted to that 8-year administrations in the West, right? One comes in, deals happen. One comes in, war happens. Right? So yes, a lot of things can play into this and change but at the current moment, statistically speaking, just looking at the facts of what's going on in the country and globally, it's very likely the Iranian regime could fall soon.
Your family has paid a heavy price in this fight. You lost your father to this fight. How does that impact you today?
I was 8 years old. And, you know, so it impacts me deeply. It has shaped who I am. But even as an 8-year-old, because of um, what I was surrounded with and what I had witnessed as an Iranian American, my mom's actually American. Um, and sort of having that kind of perspective of a Westerner looking in, even though I was born in Iran and all of that, it's still a different perspective. Even then, I understood that this is what it's going to take. And I had already witnessed so many of my friends, family members, so many of the, so many stories, my whole childhood from the time I can remember, so many stories of horrible torture and executions and brutality coming from Iran. And what my parents experienced trying to leave Iran during the revolution, and what my immediate family experienced in Iran, that I already understood that the cost was very high for what we were trying to do. And my parents thankfully included us in that conversation. So it wasn't a new, like, what happened to daddy? It was a, okay, this, and it of course devastated us. But this is about, from my family, this is about humanity. There are bigger things playing out in the world right now. And the Middle East is a big part of that, under the guise of religion, under the guise of sort of all these other things. And we believe that because of where Iran sits in the geopolitical world, that if a truly democratic, secular country rises in the Middle East, and from the ashes that Iran is going to be rising from, then it could change those dynamics globally and truly set an example for the rest of the Middle East and Muslim world, but also for the issues like we talked about today, women's issues, the religion, etc. Right? So for me, this is about that. It's like, how do I connect to it as an American every day? I don't think it's just an Iranian issue. I think and my parents very much lived like that. My father went to Berkeley, met my mom in Berkeley. My father was Iranian, and he believed that this was about a bigger picture. And this is about sort of justice for so many people around the world, and sort of a chance at real freedom. So that's how I live it, how I feel it. It's complicated being a mom, being a business owner, trying to just be normal in American society. And I have a great life, I have a great life. But this is with me always, and it will not go away until the regime falls. And it's the same for my sisters. It's the same for every one of us who have, at some point, some shape or form, come into this resistance and come into this understanding of what this is and what it takes. So yeah, that's, I guess, the best answer I can give to that question.
Yeah. I mean, how does a family recover from a loss like that? How did you and your mother and your sisters recover from losing your father?
Well, one, we had an entire movement that had lost people. My father was part of the 1988 massacre. 30,000 people were executed within a couple of months. There wasn't a person I knew that didn't lose somebody. Some people lost 4 people, 5 people. So we had each other. The resistance had each other. And I think that role of community and solidarity is huge in how you heal from something as horrible as that. But so that was, I think, a big part of it. Second part of it was my mom. She's amazing. She explained it to us and said, your dad died for a cause. He didn't, I can't imagine if my father had died for something senseless, like, but he chose to stand up against this and to fight against this. And yes, we paid the price for it. But that makes it somehow something that not only you can live with, but you can take pride in and understand that, everybody has a story, and everybody has loss of some sorts, and everybody has their own experiences. And to have meaning behind that when that happens, when such a trauma happens and such a horrible thing happens, I think I'm blessed in that way, to be honest, to have that, to hold on to that, and to be proud of him, and to know that he had the courage to do that, so I think that has really helped, and my mom allowing us to have that. I can't imagine what she felt like facing off with 3 daughters, no money. She had the movement, and that's what she had. And she moved forward. She didn't allow us to sit and dwell on it. And, she's like, we move forward as a family now. And as an adult, of course, it's still hard to think about the fact that I'll never know my father as an adult, have an adult conversation with him. But I think he did something that had a bigger impact on the world than our conversations could have had, So I think it's a combination of all of that. And I had love around me, and I had a purpose, a mission that it was all part of, that helped me sort of deal with it and grapple with it. But there were a lot of very, very hard moments. And each of us, my sisters and I, experienced it in a different way. But thankfully, I think we've all been able to create a good life and move forward and stay connected to what he fought for and what he believed in. So, yeah.
Yeah, what you're saying really solidifies for me how fundamental it is to live for something, and to live for something, to die for something. Do you feel like you are living for something? And how do you talk to your own kids about what it means to have a mission in life and to sacrifice for that mission?
I try to instill the more universal. They're little still, right? My daughter's 10, my son's 7, but they're starting to get it. And all the conversations that are happening around them now in every context, they're starting to get it. They know that this is who I am since the time they were tiny. I've been taking them to the United Nations every year since the time they were tiny. They go to protests with the resistance. They know this is as much of a part of our family life as going to celebrate Christmas with my mom. But I've tried to instill justice, the concept of justice, freedom. I take that very seriously in what they're learning at school and try to connect it for them. I try to make it a part of our conversation in our home and not avoid it. And it works. They ask really good questions, and they have moments of courage that I'm really proud of. And whether they choose to take on this cause or not, that's not something I'm going to impose on them. But I hope what I say to them is, you have to have a purpose. You have to. You can do whatever you want in this world, but it better be to make the world a better place in some shape or form. And so, if that's kind of how, from a child's perspective, I try to guide them. And I don't hide it from them. I don't hide the injustices of this world from them. I don't, obviously I don't show them horrible things, but I really try to help them see in the moment what's happening in dynamics at school, dynamics at home, and then the global picture too. But it's hard because no child should have to sort of be exposed to the things that like I did as a child all the time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But they have a different faith than I do. So, yeah, so it's finding that balance, but not losing sight of like you're part of something bigger and you have a responsibility to this world.
How do you grapple with trying to have discussions, like nuanced discussions about like this particular issue for you in an environment in the United States where ideology has become so polarized?
It's really hard. It's really, really hard right now, which is why I'm so grateful for opportunities like this, because the minute, you know, everybody has become an expert on everything. And, you know, they read an article, they this, they that, you know, and I try to take it from like understand that like your friend, this is what happened to me, and try to sort of show it from a personal perspective. And this is why it's different than what you think it is. But it's really hard. And to be honest, I compartmentalize a lot because of it. Like there are certain friends I talk to about these things, and there's certain friends who I've had in my life for decades and I don't talk about these things to. But they all know I do this, right? And whether they want to engage with me on it or not depends on the friend. But for the most part, they don't, to be honest. I probably have very rarely, I could say 2 people I can remember right now that I've actually disclosed my life to in a way that's thing. And even though I do this publicly, I do it on stages, I do it on podcasts, I do, you know, but they have to choose to engage, you know. And I think it does help when they realize that like a friend of theirs has a personal connection to this. But the sort of bigger polarization that's happening in their life is more urgent, is more relevant, right? Is more in their face. And I think, and it's to be honest, I think people are really overwhelmed. There's just so much on people right now that they're like, I can't pretend to understand that. That's too much.
Right.
So how we, as I think as a society, start to sift through the noise and see, you know, nuances and see truth, I think is the struggle that this society is up against right now. And that will be our path forward somehow. But, you know, honest conversations like this today are, I think, a big part of it. But yeah, but it's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right to point out the overwhelm of things to have an opinion about and to be informed about. And I wonder if people are just I mean, I feel this again, like as a mom who's also a working mom, like there are only so many things that I feel like I can be super knowledgeable about and be passionate about. And yet we should also feel like we have the ability to be curious, especially when our own society is suddenly, like our own government is dropping bombs somewhere. I feel like there should be
No
at least
warning.
some you know, of some element of like maybe I should just know why that's happening and how I should feel about it. And so for me also, thank you for taking the time to help me understand where to stand and what kind of questions I should be asking myself just as a global citizen. So thank you for taking the time to talk me through all of this. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you wanted to discuss?
No, this was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I really appreciate the chance to actually talk like this. They don't always go as smoothly as you know. Some are, a little rocky, but
Oh,
no.
yeah? Like, what kind of rocky conversations have you had? I'm just curious, like, as you're going out there, do you feel like people are approaching you with already an idea in mind?
A
Or,
lot often, yeah. For you feel genuinely curious, genuinely like concerned and curious, and that's not always the case, and that's okay.
hmm,
That's part of it. Those conversations have to happen too, right? But this was very this was really nice. It felt natural. It felt open. So I really appreciate that, and it honestly helped me connect my story a little bit to the current context, from mom to mom, woman to woman. So I appreciate that. But no, I don't. I just want, for the people in America and the people to understand that there are a lot of good things happening in this world. Because I feel like that's something we're missing right now, that feeling of like joy, that feeling of just like hope. Um, and it might not be in your neighborhood right now, it might not be in our government, it might not be here or there, in front of us, but there are good things that you can connect to
hmm,
happening.
there are people working hard.
There are people working really hard that have sacrificed a lot, that go unnoticed in this world. And the people I grew up with are those people. And so I hope that their voice will get more amplified in this country, because I think there are a lot more people like yourself that are like, what is really going on here? Why is this happening? So I hope people, when they think of Iran, will start to think of like what's really going on, and get to the deeper parts of it, which there are people who have given their life and have sacrificed, whether they're alive or not, have sacrificed everything to give the Iranian people a chance for freedom. And I hope that we can, as a people and as Americans, can connect to that somehow and help them get there and help the dream happen, my dream happen.